In today's video, I'm going to be talking about derived concepts. Within the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor, also known as the Domain Expert tool, is a class of artifacts known as derived concepts. A derived concept contains rules for deriving concepts or concept values based on the discovery match of one or more other concepts or tokens. Derived concepts provide the ability to find a concept based on rule definitions that have more complexity than simply matching on dictionary surface forms or by regular expressions. Derived concepts allow you to define multiple concepts or tokens that must be present in the text. They allow you to indicate if there are multiple instances of a concept to be matched. And they allow you to control the order in which the concepts can occur. Switching now to my demo to help illustrate things further. I am at the main catalog page of the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor. For the purposes of this demo, I created a cartridge called Demo Lupus. Clicking on my cartridge and taking the Edit option, you can see in the right-hand panel that there is currently a single artifact in my cartridge. This happens to be the UMLS 2019 AA Dictionary. Moving to the center of the page is the main artifacts section comprised of various artifact types: collapsing dictionaries, clinical attributes, and filters. You can see the list of existing derived concept artifacts that I have access to. Before starting from scratch, when using derived concepts, it is worthwhile to see if any of the existing sets can be reused for your particular use case. To create a new set of derived concepts, you would click Create in the upper right, and from the list select New Derived Concepts. In the pop-up, you would provide a name, and you see that the owner and the email address are automatically filled in for you. Optionally, you can provide a description and one or more tags that can be used to help categorize your artifacts. Next, the authorizations can be set to your preference. Continuing on, there is the auto-generated concept identifier format option. If enabled, the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor will generate CUIs on your behalf using the specified format for this set of derived concepts. Lastly is the UMLS version. This is the version of UMLS that will be used when working with derived concepts for both type-ahead operations and for displaying UMLS concepts in TreeView mode. TreeView relies on the relationships that exist within the UMLS ontologies. By default, UMLS latest is selected. Clicking Create will create a new derived concepts artifact called Demo Lupus Derived Concepts that automatically gets added to my cartridge. Clicking on this artifact will open it up, and I can begin adding derived concept definitions to this set by clicking the plus icon. Another way to add derived concept definitions to my cartridge is from the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor Preview mode, which I will demonstrate momentarily. Before I do that, I want to take just a minute to highlight a few things about the Add Derived Concept modal. Note an output section and a selection section. As stated here, the output section is where you define the fields that will get displayed in the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor Preview mode if the conditions of this derived concept are met. Output type is where you indicate whether it is a concept or a concept value that is being derived. Note the concept identifier field. By default, the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor has populated this field using the auto-generated CUI identifier format specified in my Derived Concepts artifact. I can use the auto-populated concept identifier, or I could set the field to another static value of my choosing. Other available options are detect from target or generate from matched concepts. Next, you specify the preferred name. Again, this can be set to a static value of my choosing. It can be dynamically detected from the target, or it can be generated from matched concepts. Lastly, in the output section is the type field. Again, I can set a static value of my choosing, or I can select to have the type field pulled from the selected target. As you can see, there is hover text in the output section that can help guide you as you populate the section of your derived concept. Moving on to the selection section, this is where you define the conditions that must be met in order for this derived concept to be promoted. A simple example could be, I want to match on an annotation type of concept, a match field of concept identifier, and I'm interested in concepts related to diabetes. Note as I start typing, the type ahead feature is enabled to help identify the concept identifier values that I may be interested in. I will go ahead and select a couple from the list to add to my definition. Also note the tree view icon that can be used to find concepts that are related to the concepts that I have selected thus far. Tree view uses the relationships present in the UMLS ontologies. Here, I can explore the UMLS relationships for the concepts diabetes and diabetes mellitus to identify any related concepts that I may want to add to my derived concept condition. For more information about tree view, please refer to video 1 in this series. Lastly, I can indicate a count for how often my annotation type must appear in the span of text. The default is exactly 1 time. The icon on the right provides the ability to add an and or condition to this condition, or I could select the delete option. Going back to the annotation type, you can see other available options that I could have chose, such as custom comparison, custom value, and token. The match field is based on what is selected for the annotation type. In this case, because concept is selected, other available options to me are parts of speech, role, or type. Note also the plus icon that can be used to add additional conditions to this derived concept. Clicking the circle icon in one of the rows gives me the ability to choose which annotation type that should be the selection target for determining preferred name and type if I elected to have those set dynamically in the output section above. By default, the first match concept would become the selection target. Moving on, there is the order section. This indicates whether the conditions must appear in the span of text in the order that they are listed here in the selection section. There is the rule scope section that defines the span of text that will be used when determining if the conditions of this derived concept have been met. Here you can indicate whether intermediate tokens are allowed between concepts or tokens in the span of text. Lastly, you can indicate whether or not to omit this concept when covered by a longer span. This is used to avoid the creation of duplicate annotations over the same span of text. Lastly, there is an optional description section for providing a description about this derived concept and an optional sample text section. The sample text is a good way to provide some text to demonstrate the basis for this rule. In this demo, I will now switch over to the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor Preview mode. I have some pre-selected unstructured text that reads, while on methylprednisolone, she experienced side effects of osteoporosis and high blood pressure. Her new job requires her to work outside during the day. Anti-nuclear antibody complement levels are low. I will select the annotators that I want to use and click Run. In the right panel, you can see the list of entities that were discovered in the text using the current artifacts in my cartridge. In this case, you see a list of concepts and concept values. For the purposes of my use case, suppose I now want to derive a concept from the unstructured text, meaning this is a concept that I want promoted by inferring meaning from within my text. I will now demonstrate how I can add a derived concept definition to my cartridge from within the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor Preview mode. Looking at the text, it mentions there are side effects of osteoporosis and high blood pressure. This is indication that there were adverse events occurring. Using derived concepts, we can add a rule to our cartridge that will match on the presence of adverse effects, such as one or more side effects that the patient experienced, and it will identify what those side effects were. I will go ahead and highlight the text, side effects of osteoporosis and high blood pressure. I will then right-click. As I hover over concepts in this case, you can see there are options: create new concept using side effect of osteoporosis and high blood pressure, and create a new derived concept. As I hover over create new derived concept, it asks me which artifact I want that new derived concept to be created in. In this case, it is my demo lupus derived concept, so I'll go ahead and select that. You can see in the Create Derived Concept pop-up that it has pre-populated the selection section with the concept discovered in my selected phrase. From this, I will build up my derived concept condition criteria. By default, any tokens that appear in my selected phrase are not listed. If I want to include the tokens as part of my condition criteria, I select the Show Tokens in Selected Phrase option. Now you can see of and appear. In my case, I am not interested in including the token, so I'll uncheck it. Because I am interested in side effects, it makes sense to include the side effects concept in my condition criteria, so I'll go ahead and select that. Next, I want to examine the concept identifier values that are listed for side effects. And they look accurate to me. Next, because I want my derived concept to be able to identify what the actual side effects were in the text, I will go ahead and include osteoporosis. But I don't want to just identify osteoporosis, since side effects could be almost any type of disease or syndrome, even high blood pressure. So instead of listing specific concept identifier values like you see listed here, I can go to the drop-down and indicate that I want to match on a type. This changes the values to those types that are associated with the concept osteoporosis. For my use case, I will only include UMLS disease or syndrome. I'll quickly mention there's also the ability to match on parts of speech. So that would be the case where my concept appears as a noun or a verb. And like we saw in the previous row, I could have matched on concept identifier. Going back to my osteoporosis entry, I am at the repeats column, where I select how often the UMLS disease or syndrome needs to occur in the span of text for it to be considered a match. In this case, I want to select one or more times. So that way it will match on all the UMLS disease or syndrome concepts that appear in the span of text. As mentioned earlier, I could select this particular concept to be my selection target. This means that when there is a match on this particular derived concept, I want it to identify what are the actual disease or syndromes relative to the side effects in the text. Moving on, you see order, rule scope, and allow intermediate tokens that were covered earlier in the demo. I'm going to select unordered in my case. Once I have my selection criteria set, I can then click Next. This expands the Create Derived Concept modal, where I can now populate the Output section. As mentioned earlier in the demo, the Output section is where I define the fields that will get displayed in the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor preview mode when promoting this derived concept if the conditions are met. The concept identifier field has been automatically filled in for me. Again, it uses the concept identifier format from my derived concepts artifact. For the preferred name, I want it to be set based on my selection target, which in this case, it will pull the preferred name from the concept that has a type of UMLS disease or syndrome in my span of text. This means the preferred name for my derived concept will be dynamically set based on what it finds in the text. For the type, I'm going to give it a static value of adverse event. Once I have my derived concept definition as I like it, I can optionally give it a description, and then I'll go ahead and click Create. It will add my new derived concept definition to my cartridge, and it will automatically rerun my unstructured text in the preview mode. Moving to the list of discovered and derived concepts in the right panel, you can now see a concept with the type adverse event. If I select it, you can see within my text osteoporosis and high blood pressure have been identified as the adverse events in my text. As I hover over one of these, it has a concept identifier or CUI for my derived concept definition. It has dynamically set the preferred name to the preferred name it pulled from the concept within my span of text where type equals UMLS disease or syndrome appeared. And the source is the name of my derived concept artifact. So this demonstrates how I was able to use derived concepts to dynamically derive the mention of two adverse events occurring in my text. Another example of a derived concept could be from a phrase where we want to derive something that is static. For example, the phrase works outside during the day infers that there is exposure to sunlight that is occurring. For people with lupus, exposure to sunlight could be a trigger for them, so this could be an important detail to know when analyzing a patient's records. In this case, the text doesn't explicitly state that there is exposure to sunlight occurring, but is something that can be inferred. In summary, I have demonstrated how derived concepts can be an important feature when analyzing unstructured text within the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor. This concludes the video.